It's May 29th, 1979, in San Antonio, Texas. The early morning was already warm, the kind of warm that arrives before the sun is fully up. The air was heavy and flat, the light was still and thin. The neighborhood was quiet and showing off the feeling it gives to its residents that nothing bad has ever happened here, and nothing bad ever will. A man walked out of his townhouse on Balcones Heights in the northwest part of the city. He was 63 years old and a federal judge. He walked towards his car. Unbeknownst to him, across the street, in a drainage ditch screened by brush, a man had been sitting there, and he had been waiting. He'd been watching this judge's routine for weeks. He knew the townhouse, he knew the car, he knew the time of morning, give or take. He was holding a Remington 700 rifle, favored for its flat trajectory and its stopping power at a distance. It took just one shot. The judge was dead before he hit the ground. His name was John H. Wood Jr. He was the first sitting federal judge to be assassinated in the United States since 1867. More than a century of institutional life ended in a single moment on a quiet street while the sprinklers ran and the birds kept singing and San Antonio went about its morning. The FBI later called it the crime of the century. That's a phrase that's been used a lot, but in this case, they meant it. The investigation that followed would cost $11.4 million, and this is not today's money. They conducted 30,000 interviews, 500,000 pieces of physical evidence, the largest deployment of federal investigative resources since the assassination of John F. Kennedy. They would find the man who pulled the trigger. They would find the man who paid him to do it. They would prosecute 5 people, convict 4 of them, and send them away for decades into the federal system. And then when it was all over, nothing changed. Drugs kept coming in, crime kept going on. This is the story that Gary Cartwright told in his book, Dirty Dealing. It was published in 1984. And yes, we're doing another Cartwright book again, back to back. It's somewhat intentional, and you'll get it. But I didn't think that I was going to do Cartwright back to back, but it just kind of is the way that this season's unfolding. So yeah, this is him. Again, he's a great writer. This is a really good book. But I think it's interesting to put these two back to back because it's the same eye. It's Gary Cartwright's eye, writer for Texas Monthly. It's the same eye that watched T. Colin Davis walk out of 2 courthouses. And now he turned this eye to the Texas border, to a family, to a system so old and so deeply embedded in Texas that no prosecution, however expensive and however righteous, was ever going to reach its roots. And we know that to this day. Cartwright told this story as a sort of fable. It's 3 brothers from El Paso. The oldest got greedy and he got killed. The second got greedier and was accused of killing a federal judge. And the third one, well, he went to prison for it. But the fable, of course, is just a container. And what's inside this container is bigger than the 3 brothers. It's so big of a story that only the state of Texas could bear to hold it. So without further ado, let's get started on this episode. My name is Jen Schaefer. This is Crude Acts, True Crime Podcast, Season 4, Murder in Print, Episode 4, Dirty Dealing. We're going to kick this off with a little chat about the city that's now called El Paso. El Paso, Texas sits at the far western tip of Texas, where the state narrows to a point. It's that little point there on the left side of our Texas map. It sits on one side of the Rio Grande River, and then on the other side is Juarez, Mexico. And these are two cities that essentially have always been one economy. The river is the line. The line has always been somewhat negotiable. The director of U.S. Customs once said that if he actually stopped all the smuggling that came through El Paso, the economy of both sides of the border would collapse. He wasn't being dramatic. He was being accurate. He was describing a system that had been in place for as long as there's been a border to cross, a system built on the movement of things, legal and illegal, often indistinguishable. And they've always been intertwined: cotton, cattle, alcohol during Prohibition, heroin in the 40s, marijuana in the 60s. The commodities change, but the corridor always stays open. So into this world, in the early parts of the 20th century, came a Lebanese family. Their grandfather had actually come through Mexico first. He had ridden in with Pancho Villa in the border territory around Juarez, not out of ideology or anything like that, but because in that time and place, if there was a man without connections and he wanted to survive, this is how he did things. The federales caught up with him eventually, and his wife bribed the guards. So she got him out. They crossed the Rio Grande into Texas, and they never went back. The grandfather later became a sheriff's deputy in El Paso. He opened a produce stand across the street from the courthouse. He built something from nothing in the particular way that immigrant families do, through proximity to legitimate institutions, a clear-eyed understanding of how power actually moves in a border town, and a complete absence of illusions about the difference between the two. Their family name was Basha'ada, but the grandfather changed it, and they became the Chagras. Abdu Chagra was his son, and he and his wife, Josephine, raised 3 sons. There was Lee, there's Jimmy, and there's Joe. Lee was the eldest. He went to UT Law School and graduated 4th in his class. He could have gone anywhere, but after that, he went home. He became the go-to criminal defense attorney for drug smugglers along the border. And Lee had a gift for it. He had the personality, the ability to walk into any room on either side of the law and make himself the most comfortable man in it. He dressed like money. He talked like a man who had already won. His courtroom style was theatrical in the way that El Paso juries responded to. And I would argue the state of Texas. He had that same gift that Racehorse Haynes had as well. Jimmy, his younger brother, the middle brother, Jimmy looked at Lee's life. He saw the fast cars, the faster women, the Las Vegas trips, the Learjet parked at El Paso International. And he saw the way that his brother walked into a room and commanded it. And Jimmy wanted that for himself. So he was like, well, how do I do this and not work for someone? He initially started a carpet business. And he started a carpet business with the slogan, "A floor without a rug is like a kiss without a hug." But of course, Jimmy knew he was built for something bigger and louder than just being a carpet salesman. So this is when it gets fun. In 1969, he got a phone call from a friend who had just come back from serving in Vietnam. His name was Pete Kreczewski. I think I said that right. Pete had served 2 tours flying Cobra helicopters, and he was the Army's most decorated Cobra pilot of the war. by some accounts at least. He had come home to a country after being in Vietnam that didn't have much use for what he knew how to do. And I think you'll see that a lot of PTSD for men and women who serve in the military and have their tours of war. They come back, and this important role that they played over there, they just don't find that place for them here. And it becomes quite the conundrum. So this is what happened to Pete, and he couldn't find work. But Pete had a connection across the border, and he also had a plan, and he had an idea. And he shared this idea with Jimmy. So this is what they did. The two of them flew down to Mexico, and they bought 700 pounds of grade A marijuana. They flew it to Aspen, Colorado, and they sold it to a group of trust fund hippies. And that little deal cleared them $85,000. Jimmy Chagra saw those dollar signs, and he never looked back. Here's the thing the DEA never quite understood about the Chagra operation. They kept looking for a Lebanese kingpin. They kept expecting a cartel structure, a foreign connection, something that matched the story they had already had in their heads about where this kind of organized crime came from. And then what they found instead was El Paso. And in El Paso, there was a whole ass ecosystem. So it wasn't just Jimmy Chagra. There was Jack Strickland. He was the son of a vice president of El Paso Natural Gas. He grew up in one of the better neighborhoods in the Upper Valley. He and his friend Mike Halliday had been running their own border operation for years, sourcing through, and catch this, Aurora's grandmother, known as La Nacha. Who was, as Halliday put it, the Pablo Escobar of marijuana, like the biggest supplier in the region, La Nacha. Just a grandmother. I get it, drugs are bad, but I think that's funny. Jack was the business mind behind this operation. Mike was the smuggler. They had an organization, they had investors, they had loyalty, they had lawyers, bankers, doctors, barbers, waitresses. Strickland raised $400,000 in startup capital from El Paso civilians by promising them a 3-to-1 return. He called it a deal. His investors called it a miracle. And this is in El Paso, and this is with drugs. I think it's funny. Lee Chagra, of course, was their attorney. That is how Jimmy came in, not as a kingpin, not as a man running things. He was hired for this thing with this guy, Pete. Strickland and Halliday had their thing, but in the summer of 1975, the Mexican marijuana supply was degrading, and the mordida, aka the bribe money that it cost to pay to get their product across the border, that became eating into the margins more. So they needed new supply from new territory, and that new territory became Colombia. To make the switch, Strickland needed a new connection. He needed someone who spoke Spanish, who was fearless, who could walk into a room of Colombian cartel men and convince them that he was worth doing business with. And that's when he brought in Jimmy Chagra, the little brother of his lawyer. So Jimmy found a shoe shine boy in Colombia, and that's like a dude who is connected to one of the cartel heads and that could hook him up. Jimmy sat down with the man and convinced him through sheer force of his personality and with absolutely no evidence. And he convinced him that he was the biggest marijuana operator in the United States. The Colombians totally believed him. They put a load together. The final count was 58,000 pounds of marijuana, a 90-foot shrimping trawler with a Colombian captain, no GPS, navigating by looking into the Atlantic coast and doing it the old school way, which is pretty cool. They get this from the Colombians and they do the deal. They got the product and they offloaded in an isolated cove called Folly Cove. And this is near Gloucester, Massachusetts. And this is in the summer of 1975. The payoff for that was nearly $15 million. Strickland's investors got their 3-1. And the DEA was scratching their heads trying to figure out where all the new cars in El Paso were coming from. Over the next 10 years, what had started as a border operation among El Paso boyhood friends became arguably the largest marijuana importing organization in the world. Not in El Paso, not in Texas, not in the United States, but in the world. 6 planes, 4 freighter ships, Colombian supply lines established and maintained, a formal arrangement with Lyndon Pendling, who was the Prime Minister of the Bahamas, and he allowed safe passage through the islands, of course, for a fee. A deal with Raymond Patriciarca, and he was the New England mob boss. And so they got that deal with him to offload cargo along the Massachusetts coastline and move it north through Providence and Boston. DEA officials and border patrolmen on the payroll, of course, looking the other direction on schedule. $5 to $10 million a drop. This is the 1970s. I'm not going to do the math, but that's a lot of money. And then, of course, there was also a loose partnership with another guy named Joe Bonanno. He's a big dude, a big mafia guy. And he was the retired head of the Bonanno crime family, and he was living quietly in Tucson, Arizona. Jimmy actually owed this man some money, kind of debt that doesn't get forgiven because you ask nicely for it to be forgiven. So he owed him some money. And so they've got a deal worked out with him too. So we've got a couple mobsters. One's in Arizona, one's in Massachusetts. We've got our stuff going on in Texas. So the business is murky, but very lucrative to say the least. Lee Chagra was the pen to paper man. He kept the books and he kept everything moving. And he also had muscle connections. That's just Lee Chagra's been in it for a minute. He represented the Banditos Motorcycle Club. So they had favors to return for him, and they returned their favors with their brute force. Jimmy moved his base of operations later in the 70s to Florida, which by that point was running so much Colombian marijuana through Dade County that it had become the state's leading industry. $7 billion through one county alone. Jimmy arrived at the crest of that wave. At this point, he started laundering his money at Caesar's Palace. So he'd walk in with footlockers of cash, literal footlockers of cash, the kind that you pack for summer camp. He walked in with his money in these. He handed them to casino cashiers for counting. He played craps while they did at $10,000 a pass. He played blackjack. He did all the other things that all the other gamblers do. He would run through $1 million in 5 minutes, gain or lose, and not change his expression once because it really didn't matter. He tipped the dealers. He tipped the cocktail waitresses tens of thousands of dollars a night. I think I might be in the wrong industry. Jimmy was so well known in Caesar's Palace that he once had Frank Sinatra moved to a different suite. Out of the Frank Sinatra suite, he had him moved out of his suite because that's where he wanted to stay. And the casino management totally did it. He explained this all to Sinatra, and Sinatra moved. Jimmy Chagra was worth more to them than Frank Sinatra. Think about what that sentence means. He was, by any measure, one of the most flamboyant figures in Las Vegas in the 1970s. And Las Vegas in the 1970s did not suffer from a shortage of competition for that title. And here's the thing about Caesar's Palace, because I'm learning more about people the more I read these books. And Gary Cartwright is a treasure trove of information and the good, juicy stuff. And I want to stop for a second because Caesar's Palace is not just a backdrop in this story. It is a thread, or at least a node of some sort. I'm still trying to figure it all out. If you heard episode 2 of this season, the episode was about a book called Run, Brother, Run, the murder of Alan Berg in Houston in 1968, the case that first put Charles Harrelson, the case that first put his name in public record. So if you read this book, or if you listen to my episode, you're going to read or hear about a name that's Saul Rogers. Saul Rogers was a wealthy man from a wealthy family from Beaumont, Texas. He made his money in building Texas State Optical. He was a developer, a banker, a deal maker. He was part of the Gulf Coast version of all these things as well, which comes with its own weight. Saul Rogers and his brothers were major principals in the building of Caesar's Palace, and they owned an interest in it. In late 1967, Saul Rogers approached Alan Berg, who was the victim in the book, with a proposition to promote and help run a casino boat through the Gulf Coast market. He needed Alan to be the face man because Nevada barred anyone with an interest in a licensed Nevada casino from holding any other gambling interest anywhere else. Saul did this. He brought in this guy named Ted Lewin, who was a Las Vegas bookie and gangster. And as he was putting this together, almost immediately the FBI found out. And they even brought Alan in for questioning. And they brought in Saul for questioning. And when the agents came to his office, he denied the whole thing, of course. And not 30 minutes after the agents left Saul's office, Saul called Alan and he killed the deal. So fast forward to May 1968. The story I just told you, by the way, was late 1967, so like November 1967. May 1968, Alan was killed by a hitman. Hitman went to trial, but they never solved the case. Go listen to episode 2 so you can get your bearings on all that if you haven't already. I find a few correlations here interesting. One is the Chagras and the Bergs were both carpet business guys. And anytime I see a coincidence in these, you have to highlight it because I do believe that, yes, coincidences can happen, but also coincidences are interesting and they are often threads. So both the Chagras and the Bergs were in the carpet business. Then, of course, there's the link to Saul Rogers through Caesar's Palace, through money, through gambling, and the architecture was already in place. Caesar's Palace was built with Teamsters pension fund money, regularly used by organized crime figures across the country. We all know that, right? And it was already functioned as a destination for the Gulf Coast criminal economy because everything had left Galveston. We're going to talk about that in the next episode. And so the place where money comes from, Texas, Louisiana, the Gulf, it went to these places in Nevada to get clean, if you will. So, and I just told you about that. So when Jimmy Chagra walked in through the front door with his footlockers of cash, he wasn't just finding a place to launder money. That had already been running for decades. It was the same ownership structure, the same casino cages, the same infrastructure that connected Beaumont money to Vegas tables to Gulf Coast operators who needed somewhere for the proceeds to go. And the families, of course, change in all this. They're just variables in the equation, but the infrastructure stays the same. That is the constant. So people are placeholders, interchangeable variables in the same equation. 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, it's all the same system, the same game, just different players. Now that you know all that, and I probably should have saved that for behind the case, but I want to talk about it because all of it's connected. And you'll see and you'll hear all these stories and you'll realize that they're connected to bigger things and that this season, yes, is multiple different stories, but it is one large story, and that's the story of Texas. So, back to Jimmy. In 1977, Jimmy Chagra hit a bad streak of luck. He lost 2 planes in one of their deals. He lost a lot of product that was on these planes. He also had a new partner. an ex-convict named Henry Wallace. But as with ex-cons, that partnership soured fast. Wallace owed Jimmy $150,000 from a Mexico deal that had gone sideways. And when Jimmy came to collect, things got ugly. The banditos were there. Someone threatened to pour gasoline on a man's dog. It was that kind of negotiation. So afterwards, Wallace resolved this dispute by going to the DEA. I guess they scared him that much, or he just couldn't handle it that much, but that's what he did. So by the late 1970s, the federal government had decided it was done watching Jimmy and Lee and all their little sidekicks. They were tired of sitting back and watching their little drug dance. They're like, okay, now we have to do something. A United States attorney named James Kerr built a grand jury in El Paso specifically to dismantle the Chagra operation from the top down. Kerr wrote the Continuing Criminal Enterprise provision of the 1970 Drug Control Act. That is the legal mechanism that allows prosecutors to charge an entire organization as a single enterprise and target the kingpin specifically. What he had written in this provision, if you will, was a weapon. And now he was intending on using it. So Kerr was convinced that Lee was the real architect behind all this, that it wasn't Jimmy, it was Lee. He was the legal brain, the financial manager, the man who made Jimmy's empire function. The DEA agreed with him. They kept trying to get smugglers to flip on Lee, but no one ever would. That is until Henry Wallace handed them Jimmy. Of course, things got dangerous first. On November 21st, 1978, James Kerr was driving home. A man came up alongside him on the highway. A burst of .30 caliber rounds punched through the car's body. Kerr drove onto the floorboard and held there. When he raised his head, the van was gone. But he was alive, no bullet holes in him at all, which had not been the plan. No one was ever charged for the attempted murder of James Kerr. 1 month later, on December 23rd, 1978, someone buzzed the intercom at Lee Chagra's office in El Paso. Lee was upstairs in the apartment above the office. He was watching the Sun Bowl game on television. It was the day before Christmas Eve. He assumed it was a client with a will problem or someone who needed something and couldn't wait until after the holiday, so he buzzed the man up. He went out to meet him, and when Lee looked down the staircase, he saw a young man coming up with a gun. Frightened, he goes back into his office to hide, but it was too late. The man busts in, and he shoots him twice, and then he takes off. So Lee Chagra was, at this point, 44 years old. He was shot twice. He died in the office almost immediately. He was surrounded by the files of every client that he had ever defended. And this is 2 days before Christmas. The bag of cash that was usually kept in the office was missing when police arrived. $450,000. Money that Lee had been holding against a drug debt owed to Joe Bonanno. The working theory was that the murder was a collection. Someone had decided to take the money and eliminate the middleman in a single visit. The killer was never identified with certainty. The money was never found. That case was never solved. Lee Chagra's funeral drew people from every stratum of Southwest Texas society. Jimmy showed up in a white suit, black cowboy boots, a black cowboy hat with the words Lee Chagra and freedom hand-stitched across the brim. He carried a black cane with a gold handle. He called himself the Black Striker, and it was a message, and everyone in that church understood it. This is how much my brother meant to me, and I'm not finished. Grief in Jimmy Chagra's emotional vocabulary and rage were not distinguishable from one another. So 2 months later, in February of 1979, Jimmy was arrested on federal trafficking charges. The case would be tried in San Antonio before the United States District Judge John H. Wood Jr., a.k.a. Maximum John is what they called him. This man's reputation was not complicated. He gave the maximum sentence every single time. For drug crimes specifically, he believed that the law said what it meant and meant what it said, and that his job was to apply it without adjustment. Prosecutors routed important drug cases to his courtroom specifically because they knew what would come out on the other end of it. The longest sentence the statute would allow, and it would be handed down without hesitation because Wood didn't agonize over it. Wood didn't split differences. Wood sentenced, and that was that. So Jimmy Chagra was looking at life without the possibility of parole regarding these drug charges. So at first, he tried to bribe the judge, but that didn't work. As a matter of fact, it only made things worse. And so Jimmy Chagra made a different decision. In Las Vegas, during one of his drops, I'm sure, because he was still doing it on the sneak and doing all his things that he was doing. So he goes to Las Vegas and he meets a man named Charles Harrelson. And that's another name from episode 2. Harrelson was a professional hitman. He had been acquitted of one contract killing in the 1960s, convicted of another in the mid-70s, served 5 years of a 15-year sentence, and was back in circulation. He was a known product in the Texas criminal market. He had done time and come out the other side intact, which in that world is its own kind of credential. He was available, he was proven, and he had a price. This time, with these stakes, $250,000, half up front, half after. And that's what led to May 29th, 1979, San Antonio, and the one shot that killed Judge Wood. As I said before, the FBI called it the crime of the century. And for once, I guess that promotional language was not entirely wrong. The investigation would run for years. It touched on every corner of the Chagra network, every casino transaction, every phone call, every face at the table in Las Vegas and in El Paso and in Boston and Medellin, all the places. And the government was not particular about its methods either. It cost them a lot of money. Or should I say, specifically $11.4 million in the 1970s. Jimmy had already been convicted on drug charges and was serving 30 years at Leavenworth when the Wood investigation caught up to him. The FBI obtained authorization to wire the Leavenworth visiting room, and not just to bug it, but just to record every conversation that happened in that room. And everything was admissible in court. Younger brother Joe Chagra was caught on tape in the visiting room at Leavenworth, talking to his brother about the murder of the federal judge. The tape became the spine of the prosecution. Jimmy was indicted for murder. Charles Harrelson was indicted for murder. Joe Chagra was indicted for conspiracy. Jimmy's wife Elizabeth, as well as Joanne Harrelson, they were all charged. The trials themselves became their own kind of theater. Did you like the way I said theater? The venue was San Antonio, of course, in a federal courthouse that was named after John Wood. The judge presiding had personally delivered Wood's eulogy. This is not a neutral space by any stretch of the imagination. This is a room built to demonstrate that the federal judiciary would protect its own, that the institution was not going to be intimidated or shot at on a Tuesday morning without consequences. But Harrelson's defense attorney was extraordinary. He claimed that, yes, he had told people he killed John Wood. And Harrelson said that he had said it in Vegas and that he accepted money contingent on the claim being true. But he didn't do it. He didn't actually do it. That was someone else. He had been running a con on Jimmy Chagra, taking the money, claiming the credit, banking on the fact that Jimmy was too exposed to ever call him out on it. Harrelson was a liar and a grifter, the defense argued, but he was not a murderer. Well, not this time at least. Of course, the jury did not believe him. Interesting how lies work for some, but not for others. Charles Harrelson was convicted of the murder of John H. Wood Jr. and sentenced to consecutive life terms. Of course, later, he was there for the rest of his life, and he would die in prison in 2007 at the age of 69. He never stopped insisting that the truth of what happened that morning in San Antonio was actually more complicated than the verdict allowed. His son, the actor Woody Harrelson, has spoken publicly about what it meant to carry the name of his father. His father, in prison for killing a federal judge, the weight of it in every room he walked into for the rest of his life. He's talked about that, and I think it's interesting. Joe Chagra, the youngest brother, he pleaded guilty to conspiracy, meaning he had known about it. He hadn't stopped it. He had talked about it on tape in a federal prison waiting room. But the distance between knowing your brother has done something and being a conspirator in it is a distance that the law doesn't always honor. So he very well could have known about it, but what was he supposed to do to stop it anyway? Joe pleaded guilty to protect himself from something worse, of course, and in exchange, he agreed to cooperate. His testimony helped convict Charles Harrelson, and Joe served 10 years. And then you get to Jimmy. Jimmy's trial, at least, it was, of course, the main event, and it produced a result that nobody expected. Jimmy had originally agreed to cooperate with the government, but then with characteristic unpredictability, he recanted. He fired his attorneys, and then he hired Oscar Goodman, the Las Vegas mob lawyer who would later become the mayor of Las Vegas. And all of that is a sentence that tells you everything you need to know about Las Vegas right there. But Oscar Goodman is quite a figure. On my Behind the Case episode, because I already gave away some of the goodies, but on my Behind the Case episode about this, I'll tell you a little more about Oscar Goodman and how he was connected to a case involving a major drug dealer and a smuggling Chambers County constable. And if you know what I'm talking about, it's one of those, if you know, you know. If you know what I'm talking about, that you know what I'm talking about. So stay tuned for that, because I'm going to talk about that on Behind the Case, and that'll be on YouTube. Those are in development. It's going to be a minute. I'm in the middle of moving, so apologies. But with Goodman representing him, Jimmy went to trial on the murder charge. And because I told you this guy Goodman was good at what he did, the jury acquitted him. I swear you can't make it up, right? He was acquitted. Jimmy Chagra, the man who had paid for the murder of a federal judge who was this big-time drug runner, was found not guilty of murder by a jury of his peers in a courthouse named for the man that he had ordered killed. And his brother Joe was found guilty of conspiracy. This is what's wild about it. His brother, Joe, was found guilty, served 10 years in a federal prison for, quote, conspiring with Jimmy to commit a crime that the jury had just determined Jimmy did not commit. That is wild. And you've got Gary Cartwright seeing this whole thing. He saw the Chagra case the same way he saw the T. Colin Davis case. not as an admiration, but more as a revelation. He understood that the Texas-Mexico border was always the point. El Paso had been built on the movement of things across the line, legal and illegal, often indistinguishable. And the Chagras had not corrupted that world. They'd read it correctly as it is, understood what the border offered, and they took it. He understood that this was not a story about a Lebanese family from El Paso. It was a story about an El Paso social network. Anglo men and Lebanese men, sons of natural gas executives, rug merchants, Vietnam helicopter pilots, and border-wise ex-cons who all understood the same thing about the geography that they lived in and what it offered to people willing to use it. The DEA kept looking for a kingpin. What they had instead, without even realizing it, I still don't know if they realize it, but what they had was a community. And that is Texas for you, not just El Paso. And there's Las Vegas, not separate from the Gulf Coast criminal economy by any stretch of the imagination. It was a destination, the place where all the money went to become clean, at least the big stuff. You've got the small businesses for the small stuff, and you've got oil, and you've got banks, and you've got all those things. But they also like to bring it to Las Vegas. It was a great place to clean money. The infrastructure connecting Gulf Coast money to Novato casino cages was already built and already running before Jimmy Chagra ever walked through the door. I've said this already. I just wanted to drive it home. And I want to give you that example. Saul Rogers from Beaumont had a stake in Caesar's Palace and was trying to run a gambling boat out of Galveston in 1967 using a Las Vegas gangster and a carpet salesman to run it before the FBI came in and shut it down. Charles Harrelson shot and killed that carpet salesman, allegedly, and that's Run, Brother, Run. 10 years later, Charles Harrelson shot and killed a judge after being hired by a former carpet salesman turned drug smuggler Jimmy Chagra, allegedly. Gary Cartwright may have missed this, but he understood the fable. I hope you're seeing the pattern here. 3 brothers from El Paso, one dead in his own office 2 days before Christmas, one acquitted of murder that he had ordered, and one in prison for conspiring in that murder that a jury said never happened. The fable has the shape of consequence. But the shape is always the trick, right? The shape is always the trick. The shape was and is what the system wants you to see. At the end of Cartwright's book is a quote by a woman named Molly Ivers. The feds ran amok in search of evildoers. A federal judge got murdered. A whole mess of other folks got sent to prison. And I'll add to that. All the while, the drugs kept coming. Nothing has changed. Jimmy Chagra died in 2008 in Mesa, Arizona, living under the assumed name of James Madrid. And he was in the Federal Witness Protection Program, actually. He had eventually cooperated, made his deals, reduced his sentence, enough to get out at least. He spent the final years of his life talking to a Las Vegas writer, telling him the story of everything he'd done and everything he'd seen and everything he'd lost. The empire, the money, the brother he had buried 2 days before Christmas, the wife he had put in federal prison, the judge he had ordered to kill on a quiet Tuesday morning. He told it all. He was 63 years old when he died, the same age as Judge John Wood. The border is still the border. The casino cages are still open. The infrastructure does not mourn its variables. It waits for the next family to understand what it offers and to take it. And if you keep digging, you'll notice it never waits very long. That's all I have for now. If you want to go deeper on what connects these stories, on the current running beneath all of it, from Galveston to Las Vegas to El Paso and back, I've got the behind the case episodes that I'm working on. So I'll be putting them out on YouTube. Just stay tuned. It's all coming together. It'll all be out eventually. It just takes a little time. Remember, the deeper you dig in Texas, the more crud you'll find. So if you're having fun with this, come dig with me. Go check out those books. Check out the threads that I mentioned. It's a lot of fun, actually, once you start doing it. Again, my name is Jen Schaefer, and this is Crude Acts, a true crime podcast. And we will see you next time.